Welcome back to Deciding Iowa. I'm Dr. Shawn Ellerbroek, cancer research scientist, biochemistry professor, school board member, and former House District 57 candidate.
And I'm Dr. Emily Boevers, an OBGYN, mother of three, and a health advocate. Today, we're bringing you episode 2 of 6 in our series on water. We are going to be discussing today where our drinking water comes from, how much we have, and efforts to monitor its condition.
Recently, central Iowa has been in state and national news for nitrate levels in the rivers, and that resulted in water use curbs and stress on water treatment facilities. Well, should we go to the experts to learn more?
Yes, please. Today we have former state representative Chuck Isenhart, who represented the 72nd District in the Iowa House of Representatives for over a decade. This past year, he's been busy as an investigative reporter, and you can catch his thoughts on his Substack.
And we will also be joined by Wally Taylor, who has practiced environmental law for over 40 years and currently representing the Sierra Club in challenging the carbon capture and sequestration pipelines and previously in challenging the Dakota Access crude oil pipeline. Here we go. Welcome to Deciding Iowa. We're here today with two guests to talk about water quality in the state. With us is former state representative Chuck Isenhart, who represented the 72nd District in the Iowa House of Representatives from 2008 to 2025. This past year has been busy as an investigative reporter, photographer, and recovering Iowa State legislator offering research, analysis, education, and public affairs advocacy. His Substack is always a compelling read, and he is a staunch advocate for environmental responsibility. Welcome, Representative Isenhart.
Thank you very much. Good to be here and good to see you again.
Also here today with us is Mr. Wally Taylor, a graduate of Drake Law School, who has practiced environmental law for over 40 years, primarily cases involving issues of water and air quality, land use, and nuclear power. He is currently representing the Sierra Club in challenging the carbon capture and sequestration pipelines, and previously in challenging the Dakota Access crude oil pipeline. Welcome, Mr. Taylor.
Pleasure to be here.
So we're here to talk about water, like we said, and let's just jump right in. So Iowans access the underlying water aquifers for a variety of reasons. Mr. Taylor, can you just explain what are aquifers and what kinds exist in the state?
Aquifers are underground areas of water that appear between layers of rock. And the aquifers themselves many times are a porous rock themselves. And so it's not like an underground lake necessarily. It's a porous rock that contains water. And that's where our drinking water comes from. Iowa has several aquifers at different levels. Some are lower than others. And even an aquifer like the Jordan Aquifer, which is our main one in the state, if you go from northeast Iowa to southwest Iowa, in far northeast Iowa, it's almost at the surface. They call it unconfined. But as it goes down through Des Moines and then down to southwest Iowa, it gets deeper and actually more area in that aquifer. And those deeper aquifers, the water there is hundreds of thousands of years old because they don't recharge very quickly. And whereas the aquifers near the surface recharge from rainwater and the surface runoff. There are also aquifers near the rivers that are called alluvial aquifers, and they do recharge quite quickly.
Interesting. So these aquifers, can you ballpark how much water do they hold and what does Iowa use these aquifers for?
Well, part of the problem is we don't know how much water is in there. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources is the agency that's tasked with permitting withdrawal from those aquifers. And they don't really make any attempt to find out how much water is there, how much can safely be taken out. And they just hand out these permits like candy, as I like to say. And so we don't really know how much water is there. Now, Chuck knows that in 2024, the legislature appropriated it was $250,000, I think, for the Iowa Geological Survey to start making investigations to how much water is there. And then this year, the legislature appropriated 200,000. But you might say that's a drop in the aquifer because um, it's going to take a lot more than that to really survey.
So we've seen a lot in the news in the last year or so, particularly about contamination of some of our water sources like rivers and lakes. How sensitive are the aquifers to nutrients and other chemical contamination?
It depends, I think, on how deep they are. Like I said, some of the aquifers are near the surface, some are farther down. It also depends on um, the geology above the aquifers. The area in northeast Iowa, which Chuck is familiar with, and can probably talk about this a little more, is what we call karst, or a fractured bedrock of limestone and dolomite. And because of these fractures, the water goes down in there fairly easily and fairly quickly. And so the pollution likewise um, it goes in there fairly quickly. And I think maybe we'll talk later about the CAFOs and that'll come up then.
Would I be correct in saying that when Iowans are using groundwater wells for their water supply, that this is basically digging into a level of an aquifer and that's how these wells are filled?
Yes.
Okay. And so we've seen that there's been some evidence, or some reports, I should say, of contamination in some of these wells. What programs are in existence to help the 250,000 Iowans that access their drinking water through private wells to monitor contaminants or to help clean and protect their well water?
I don't want to monopolize. If Chuck can answer that, go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, Wally and the Sierra Club have been working with on water issues forever. Really, one of the go-to organizations for this kind of information and the impacts on the public. As legislators, it's one of the many issues we deal with, and I happen to have dealt with it maybe more than others as ranking member on environmental protection. Also served on the budget subcommittee and natural resources, as well as agriculture for that matter. But it's not an issue that's routinely addressed. I can't remember a time at all in my 16 years where we had an oversight committee or we really dug deeply into some of these issues. Um, Wally's reference to the money that was appropriated in the last couple of years for the Iowa Geological Survey is really the first time where we've appropriated money to look forward, do some forward-looking research on what our current status is. So I see that as promising, and DNR, in fact, is withholding consideration of that permit with Pattison Sand until that study is in, and they can see the background, the bigger picture that they're working within. In the meantime, we've had some very small programs to try to help and deal with these things going back to the adoption of Iowa's Groundwater Protection Act. I think that was what, 1987, 1989, that area where we did some really progressive environmental legislation. And some of those funds are earmarked for the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services. I'm thinking in the range of over the course of a year, $30,000 to $60,000 per county for the county boards of health to assist folks on private wells to do testing, and if they find that there are some infrastructure issues, to provide some modest support to address those. Um, and so there is a map available online that you can see, how many of those tests are being done on an annual basis, what the prevalence of problems are in northeast Iowa. I'm sad to say that Dubuque County, for some reason, did not report the data for a long time, and so we're just getting back into that. And really we were not very aggressive in using that money. But folks like David Courtney, who is director of the University of Iowa Center for the Health Effects of Environmental Contamination, has been doing some study in northeast Iowa regarding the quality of drinking water in private wells. He, in fact, will be coming to Dubuque on September 15th to do a presentation on his research. And if that research shows anything like what they've seen in Wisconsin, there will be some eyebrows raised because at one point, research there showed that up to 42% of those private wells had E. coli and other contaminants above the threshold of detection, etc. And the geology in the Driftless area of Wisconsin is very similar to Iowa, so I'd be surprised if we'd see a whole lot different. But there is that small program for landowners and private well owners, but we've not really at the legislative level looked more aggressively. For example, I did a bill not long ago that would have required every public water utility to have a study and a plan in place on how they're going to protect their source waters. Believe it or not, there's no state requirement in place that water utilities understand the status of or what their plans are for protecting their source waters. Seems to me that that would be kind of a no-brainer. A lot do. I'm not saying it's not done, but there's no requirement. So even some improvements around the edges like that, there's really been no taste in the legislature for addressing um, what I call clean water issues. I don't necessarily refer to it as water quality because water quality can be good, it could be bad. We as a state should really have a commitment to clean water.
Central Iowa has been in state and national news as far as Iowa nitrate levels are being high in their rivers. And when you look at the Raccoon and the Des Moines River, that's a source of water, drinking water eventually, for almost 500,000 Iowans living in central Iowa. And having that high levels of nitrate, understandably, is of a concern, and it's picked up a lot of momentum. Well, recently, the United States Environmental Protection Agency rescinded its decision to add 7 Iowa river segments to the state's impaired water list, including the aforementioned Raccoon and Des Moines rivers. What are the possible ramifications for this removal of those segments as impaired waterways? What does it mean as far as testing and what can be done to make sure that we're not putting too much nutrient load into those waterways?
Only back up just a little bit. The Clean Water Act is a federal act, delegates to the states the duty to enforce and execute the requirements of the Clean Water Act. And one of those requirements is that every 2 years, the state must create this impaired waters list, which is all the water segments in Iowa that they can identify at least that do not meet water quality standards. And so once the water segment is on this list, the state's required to prepare what's called a total maximum daily load, or TMDL, for that water segment. The TMDL is a calculation of how much pollution of various types can be discharged into that particular water segment from all sources and still maintain water quality. So if a segment is not on that list, it won't get a TMDL. And that TMDL is used then, supposedly, although we haven't done a very good job of it, is supposed to be used to create a plan to clean up of that waterway so that it's no longer on the impaired waters list. So when you take some water segments off that list, they won't get a TMDL, and that segment of water won't get cleaned up.
And moreover, will allow the Department of Natural Issues to issue additional permits for polluters upstream. If there are major emitters that are limited in what they can do because there is a TMDL on it, they can't necessarily get permits. That removes that barrier by removing the TMDL. So if there was a large CAFO or a dairy operation or a hog slaughtering facility that or some other industrial facility that wanted to um, discharge into that stream, the DNR can basically rubber stamp that permit.
So
This
in that
is a
sense,
travesty to the people of Iowa.
I can't imagine that, then we're not going to see more news about high nitrate levels and lack of available water to dilute those nitrates out and more water use stoppage for people in the central Iowa area. It does not appear to have a bright future unless we actually take a little bit more control over what we're allowing in those waterways. So that's
Yes.
not very good news.
One of the unfortunate things is there are a number of cities, Cedar Rapids is one, Dubuque is another, that looking at how much they're going to have to spend on upgrading their wastewater facilities. And in Dubuque, it's last I heard 10, 12, $15 million. They're looking at what could we do? Can we invest a fraction of that money upstream to prevent the contaminants from getting into the water so we don't have to take it back out? And this just undermines that totally that thought process because if there is no limit on what can be put in the water upstream, it doesn't make any sense for the municipalities that are regulated to invest any money to help landowners upstream.
Well, and I'm sure that I know everyone here feels the weight of this and how it will affect Iowans, but for myself and in my role, I think about the patients that I'll see that are dealing with, high nitrates in water. There again, you think about the health risks over chronic exposure, infant risks that infants don't properly oxygenate their blood, risks of miscarriages and infertility, risk of developmental delays in pregnancies that are exposed to chronic levels of high nitrite, some increased cancer risks again. And so, these are the people that we will have to see down the line, and somebody someday is going to have to explain why we didn't take care of our water.
Yeah, and I think the explainers have to be the public officials.
I left that conversation even more concerned about how we are failing to protect our water resources. There is real tension between protecting our water and the reality of supporting Iowa's economy through agriculture and other industries that consume and contaminate it. That was a real clear call to find answers and act.
I agree. We need more information to find those answers. Dr. Helmers discussed state efforts to support Iowa's farmers in reducing nutrient release into our water. But how are those nutrients are delivered to fields, and how do other non-point sources contribute to water contamination in our state? Stay tuned in the next episode of Deciding Iowa.
Sounds good. See you then, folks.